Task Force meeting number 9. Yeah, so start as the way to begin. We're going to go over our plan for our time together today. Moment here to get the slides and everything set. Our plan for today is we'll go over the agenda. We'll recap some of the previous meetings. We'll talk a little bit about some remediation things and some cost things, and then we'll go over the main part of today is going over the public engagement survey. Then I will do a chance for questions after all the presentations, and then we'll do a break. Come back, we'll do public comment first, and then task force discussion as the last thing on the agenda today. That is our plan. All right, so welcome introductions. I'll start. My name is Hans Navy. I manage the Close and Fills program here at MPCA.
Nathan Wallerstedt, I'm a project manager branch chief in the Army Corps of Engineers in St. Paul.
David Bell, I'm a research scientist at the Minnesota Department of Health in our environmental surveillance assessment section.
Melanie McMahon, I'm Deputy Director of the Department of Planning and Economic Development with the City of St. Paul.
Caleb Johnson, I'm the Environmental Program Manager for Washington County.
Bill Sumner, Council Member, City of Newport.
Kirk Adamka, Assistant Commissioner with Resource Control.
Dave Magnuson, Waste Regulation Supervisor, Dakota County.
Sam Paskey, Assistant General Manager in the Environmental Services Division of the Met Council.
Dan Scollin, I'm a hydrologist covering the East Metro area for the Minnesota DNR.
Victoria Reinhardt, representing Ramsey County.
In the back, we have
Everyone, I'm Kara Van Leberge with Zan Associates.
Jenna Roberts, I'm with Zan Associates.
a recap of previous meetings and some next steps. So this is sort of the trajectory that we see ourselves on. There's 3 parts to our work together. The first part is really getting familiarized with the site, building connections with the community, and sort of making up a plan, a framework for moving forward. That is the first part. We're thinking we were through that in December 2024. We're in the second part now, which is really about decision making and recommendations coming from the task force, really starting to formulate what those are. And they're really in 3 different areas. One is remediation, 2 is recommendations for reuse, future reuse. And the part we haven't talked a whole lot about yet, we did a little bit, but we really need to do more work, which is costs, what the plan can be for funding options. We're thinking these next 3 meetings are really big meetings for us because we're going to begin to do a lot of this forming, scoping work on what recommendations would be. After that, we're in a report writing, documenting mode. And we're picturing, we're circulating drafts among you for comment. That's what we think where we are on our trajectory to the end, which is a final report we're hoping in December 2025, which will leave us a little bit of cushion before the actual deadline. That's the trajectory. Okay, just real refresh real quick. Future land use options, we're putting them in 3 different categories. Recreational future reuse options, there's 2. There's passive reuses and active reuses that could be recreation. There's a reuse as a nature area, mostly habitat, and there's also industrial commercial possibilities for reuse. These are generally these are the 3 buckets we've been talking about for reuse options. Remediation goals are determined by the data, what the data is telling us, where cleanup is needed. There's 4 different things on the list. The biggest thing is the source, the waste. What are we going to do about the waste? We're thinking this is primarily the focus of the task force, a recommendation about the waste. There are other areas where we believe cleanup is needed. That's Pig's Eye Lake sediments, impacts to groundwater, and upstream sources that are contributing contamination onto the property, really through Battle Creek. Those are important. Those are, we're going to reserve those for the MPCA technical team feasibility study. Really the most important thing is the waste. If the waste is dealt with, these other things get a little bit easier. That is where we're at. So for remediation, we've been talking about really 4 different options for the waste. I'll just go through them real quick. Targeted waste relocation and filter. This is removing a small amount of waste from places where waste is closest to water. Around Battle Creek and adjacent to Pig's Eye Lake. Then we would install a filtering material to try to reduce the amount of contamination that's going from the waste into the water. This is the lower cost option. Construction cost 30 million. There's a little note at the bottom I want to call your attention to. These are very rough cost estimates. Minus 50 plus 100%. It could be double this. We actually get into the details. We're still at a high conceptual level. Targeted waste relocation filter, the lowest cost option. These 5-year timeline. Dig and haul, no backfill. We would dig up all the waste and haul it to a permanent facility and not backfill. This would create a new water body, new wetland area, also known as New Pig's Eye Lake. 720 million preliminary construction cost, 8 to 10 years. There's also dig and haul and backfill. Haul it all to a permanent facility and fill it in. Opens up more possibilities for reuse with greater cost, 830 million, 10 plus years. Operating costs here are a little higher than the dig and haul, no backfill. The last option we've talked about is we're calling it dig and line, New Pig's Eye landfill. We would reconstruct a new landfill on the property with a liner. The waste footprint would be smaller, but the height would be much taller. We would pile the waste high. We would free up some additional space around the new landfill that could be reused in different ways. 570 million preliminary cost, 10 plus years. Operating costs are the highest here, $45 million. In the end, this is not a good place for a waste, whether it's on a liner or not a liner. It's still a difficult place to be doing a landfill. It could be done. Likely going to be some complications with long-term operation and maintenance. These are the 4 options we've been talking about. And in the task force discussions, it's been other things we've touched on. We just want to go over those real quickly and briefly, and also talk about some of the assumptions that are behind the cost estimates. Okay, so these are pictures that take me back because I took them 25 years ago. So when we did some of the early work, that work was to remove over 200 barrels of hazardous waste at the Pig's Eye dump. And we got to what we thought were the edges, but we weren't sure. So we said, let's do some test trenching to see if we've found all the waste, all the hazardous waste that could be found. There's no way we can conclude that. What we did find is it wasn't in the places we were digging and thought it might be based on some magnetic survey. So pulling these out of the file, what you see on one side is, yep, the water was generally low at this time of this year, which is why we did the digging. We wouldn't have done this if the water wasn't low, but it's still there, not too far to get in the water. There's definitely waste sitting in water. If you look at the waste, it looks like a bunch of soil with some waste mixed in. From this distance and this angle, it does look like that. This is really, I'd say, typical of old waste. You see this other landfills too, where we've had to dig into them. The WDE, hazardous waste pit removal, is another case recently. It looked sort of similar to this. What's happened here is everything that was organic is broken down. This is partly why landfill gas is generated, because in the breakdown process, you generate landfill gas. So what's left is something that looks like soil. It's not really soil. It's kind of a lower grade compost kind of material, but everything that doesn't break down is mixed in. Okay. And in this case, what looks like soil is also contaminated with other things, including PFAS. If you look closer, you'll realize digital camera technology has progressed a lot in 25 years. But also, when you zoom in on the bucket, it is this plasticky, filmy, fibrous stuff, the stuff that didn't break down, that is left behind, sort of surrounded by things that did break down. So I just wanted to show this to kind of give you a picture. We talked about the waste, at least at this place, in this hole, this is what it looked like. The big landfill site might be slightly different in different places. So a little background. Okay, just to touch on a few things we've touched on before. Other ways to make waste go away. You can use something called thermal decomposition as a disposal method. And there's themes and variations on using thermal decomposition. They come in different shapes and sizes with different outputs, depending on temperature and also the amount of oxygen in the process. So low oxygen, lower temperature. This is pyrolysis. It generates mostly a char, a solid material that can be used in different kinds of ways, and also something called syngas. It's a gas that can also be used in different ways. Fuel is one of them. You increase the temperature also at lower oxygen, you get syngas. And then if an excess oxygen, very high temperature, you get incineration. We didn't put these on the table for the task force to take a look at because we don't feel confident that any of them are really viable at Pig's Eye for several reasons. One is this is all, you would need an incinerator to do it. We'd probably be building one, I would guess. We haven't done enough of a feasibility study to say for sure, is there one available? I'm suspecting we would be building one. That is going to be difficult, and there'd be air emissions issues. The waste that's wet and old, this is going to be a high energy input. In general, it's a high energy input process, probably particularly high energy input here to incinerate. It doesn't work on the glass, the metal, the ceramics, so there still would be leftover waste to deal with. And effectiveness for PFAS is not completely known. There's risks that are doing that. Yeah.
I just wanted to point out, I thought that pyrolysis didn't have air emissions. Because it's carbon free.
Carbon free, say more about that.
Well, I'm just going by what we have for the anaerobic digester. And then going to pyrolysis, we get biochar and Ramsey and Washington counties. And that's different than what this is. But it once it starts, the syngas actually runs it, and we have found so far in the testing that we've done on our waste, it's not built yet, so we can't do that. But that there were no even parts per trillion of PFAS, that it actually did break it apart because of the temperature.
With pyrolysis.
Right.
It sounds like you're working on like a next generation
Yes,
version
yeah.
of this. Yeah.
We can talk a little bit about that. The permit for the DEMCON facility does have an air permit because there are emissions from the gasification and the pyrolysis component. So there will be some of that work that needs to be done.
I thought, okay. Well, I suppose there's going to be air emissions from anything that goes, but my understanding was that it was carbon.
Then the input here is old waste that's wet. That also changes effectiveness. Incineration is a little more tolerant for a wide range of waste, but it's also much higher temperature. Next slide. We talked a little bit about digestion processes. Much of this has actually already happened in the landfill in not a very efficient way, and it's generated landfill gas. So old waste, a lot of the digestion's already happened, and also doesn't do a whole lot for PFAS. Okay, talking a little bit about the preliminary cost estimates. Again, minus 50, 100% cost estimate. It could be double that. We made some assumptions in building the cost estimates. One is, after pulling out 230 drums of hazardous waste and not being sure that we've got all of it, I'm pretty sure we didn't get all of it, just don't know where it is. We went ahead and assumed that we got all of it, that there is no more hazardous waste for the cost estimate. So that is a bit of a question. It's just really hard to put any kind of number on it at this point because it's so variable. So we said, we'll just deal with that in the 50 to 100%. We assume no hazardous waste. We assumed that for the dig and haul options, the two of them, that the waste facility would accept the waste, knowing that there's PFAS in the waste signature. We assumed for the cost estimate a disposal location within 50 miles of the facility, which is a relatively small number of facilities. And we assumed that they have sufficient capacity. But we were assuming these collection of three, there's a facility close that would take it. That's an assumption. We're also assuming input into the calculation is 4.5 million cubic yards of waste. For years, we've used 8 million cubic yards as the volume of the Pig's Eye dump. The more we look at that, the less confident we feel that it is 8 million cubic yards. The area is fairly set. The question mark is, what is the waste thickness? And knowing that there has been some compaction, we're dealing with volume, not weight here. So for the cost estimate, we're going with 4.5 million cubic yards, knowing that there's work needed to update the volume estimate in the landfill.
So the landfill's charged by the ton, though. Do you have a conversion rate you're using?
We do. The engineers have. I don't have it in my head at the moment.
Okay.
Yeah.
Just curious.
Okay. So at previous meetings, we've had some good discussion about what would it look like to input a large volume of waste into our current waste disposal system for facilities within 50 miles. And the discussion was it would probably have an impact. on the system. That impact can be reduced by increasing the area in which you haul the waste to by having more facilities involved hauling greater distances. So greater distances, you have less impact on the whole system as itself. And what that comes at is also greater cost. So for the cost estimate, we assume less than 50 miles. Just to move it is 270 million is the estimate. And as you move out, say we're willing to move it between 50 and 100 miles. We're willing to move it 200 miles. We're willing to move 300 miles. The cost of just moving it goes up quite a lot. Again, preliminary estimates for the engineering team. Right, so that's the rest of the presentation. We'll talk about really what the main thing we want to focus on today, which is report out on all of the public engagement efforts. And then we'll have time for questions.
Just quickly ask one question. That's just the transportation.
Just the
So
transportation.
the tipping fee or whatever it would be are you also getting that information somehow or?
We got that far yet, other than the very preliminary. We haven't done the discussions, individual facility. How much can you take? Will you take this waste? What's the fee going to be? I haven't gotten that level of detail yet.
Be hard.
That'd be hard.
Is it in-
That'd be hard because they're going to want to. Where's your testing from? We don't have a lot of things they would need to answer a question.
You have a rough estimate included in that number? For the tipping fee?
In the overall estimates, yeah.
Oh, the overall,
Yeah,
okay.
the overall estimates is included.
Hi, everyone. Again, my name is Kara Vandenberge with Zan Associates, been helping lead public engagement for Pig's Eye. So I'm going to go over, we'll do a brief recap on the engagement we did in 2024, and then really dig into what we heard in the survey. So looking back at what we did last year, we went out and did 3 pop-ups, and that was mainly focused on just educating the public about the task force, telling them a little bit more about Pig's Eye Dump and what we're trying to achieve here. We also did 3 community meetings. We did the site tour, the virtual meeting, and then a community conversation at a coffee shop, and then also just continuous engagement on the MPCA social media pages. And when we did that engagement, we heard a little bit from the public on what their vision was for the site. And we heard mainly that people wanted the ecological health of the area prioritized. They talked about increased accessibility and the difficulty accessing the property as it is right now, wanting to see more signage and path maintained, and then really focusing on wanting to see the site cleaned up for future generations. People talked about wanting opportunities for local youth to learn about the site and participate in any restoration, and then wanting the history of the site to be maintained. People mentioned that it's a Dakota homeland and they want that to be acknowledged, and also just wanting the dump history not to be lost in any future changes to the site. And then people also talked about environmental justice for the east side. So for 2025, our big push was the survey. And so we did get really good response rate. We got 359 responses. We had the survey open for 28 days. And we advertised it in a variety of ways. We did go out and flyer in Battle Creek in the nearby neighborhood. So as you can see, the dump is there in the bottom of the image. And we flyered kind of that whole street down that kind of overlooks Pig's Eye Dump and is most proximal to the site. We also advertised the survey on the MPCA social media platforms, as well as sent out a social media toolkit for a variety of community organizations, and then also sent it to you guys to send out for your own organizations, and then sent it to the Environmental Justice Advisory Group, and as well as held a virtual meeting for people to come and ask any questions that they had about the survey. So here are some examples of community orgs in Washington County that shared our public engagement social media toolkit for the survey. So as you can see, we sent Washington County sent it out in their environmental e-update. Great River Passage and Walk and Teepee posted it on their social media and some of their other platforms. And then we also had the St. Paul Bird Alliance share it on their website, as well as Friends of the Parks and Trails of St. Paul and Ramsey County, and the Southeast Community Organization. And these are just some of the ones I found. It's possible it was shared out more in newsletters and other platforms as well. So big thanks to those groups for sending those out because that definitely contributed to our higher response rate on the survey. So that was great. And so to dig into the survey results, I know you guys have the report and hopefully have had a chance to look into it. But our big question was looking at each of the 4 ways that the site could be remediated and getting people's comfortability on each future use option. So for targeted waste relocation and filter, we asked people, how comfortable are you with active use park, passive use park, natural area, and then industrial commercial. And then I also took the averages of the comfortability ratings for each one. So 1 being the least comfortable, 5 being very comfortable. So as you can see for targeted waste relocation and filter, so if the waste stayed on site and we did more treatment, remove the waste most proximal to the water, people were most comfortable with the site being passive use park, and that received about a 3.5, so somewhere between neutral and somewhat comfortable. And then they were most uncomfortable with industrial commercial uses being done if the site were to remain, if the waste was to remain on site with the targeted waste relocation and filter. And this, the industrial and commercial paired with the targeted waste relocation and filter received the lowest comfortability rating at 1.78. So that was a little bit below not particularly comfortable, was about the average rating people provided. So then with dig and haul and backfill, similarly, most uncomfortable was industrial commercial uses, but then most comfortable was natural area. And as you can see, this one kind of shot up the average a bit. So people were much more rated very comfortable, more than the other options. So people were very comfortable, between somewhat comfortable and very comfortable for a natural area. And then same with dig and haul, no backfill. For this one, we did only include passive use park and natural area because the other options weren't really feasible if we hauled off the waste and did not fill it back in. So for passive use park and natural area was the most comfortable with 4.62, and that was the highest comfortability across all the options that we asked people about. But as you can see, for both of them, people had a higher rating for comfortability. And then for dig and line, similar again, most comfortable was with the natural area, most uncomfortable was industrial commercial uses. But as you can see, those averages are a little bit lower than some of those last 2 options that we saw. So it ranged a little bit more between a little bit over somewhat comfortable or neutral, sorry. And then when we had people fill out the survey, they did have the option to leave an open-ended comment of why they provided that rating. So of the 359 people who filled out the survey, we had 134 people provide open-ended responses. And so I went through all those open-ended responses and pulled out themes of what people said in those open-ended comments and categorized them so that we could kind of get a sense of what people were feeling. So 46% of the comments mentioned people wanting to see restoration and preservation of the wetlands and wildlife. Really just had a strong preference for restoring the site into its natural state, which aligns with kind of those other survey questions that we saw. And people really just mentioning wanting to see the site preserved for wildlife, habitat, and for the wetlands. 17% of the comments mentioned wanting to see the waste fully removed. They wanted a complete cleanup of the waste, and they mentioned wanting to prevent future contamination and avoid any long-term environmental damage, specifically to the river. And then 10% of the comments mentioned a desire for passive recreation. So people still wanted an opportunity to interact with the site. Or 10% of comments mentioned that wanted a desire for the walking trails and opportunities to engage with wildlife, so bird watching, and some kind of low-level recreation on the water, looking at kayaking, but still wanting the site to preserve its ecological value. And then we had 7% of comments mention clean water, specifically saying that they wanted water quality to be a top priority and just voicing concerns about contamination of the Mississippi River and groundwater in the area. And then 6% of comments mentioned Native representation and that the site is a Dakota site of significance. And a few people said that they specifically want Native communities' input to be heavily considered in this planning process. And then 5% mentioned access to the site, specifically saying that the site is difficult to access and that it'd probably be better utilized as a natural area or with passive recreation, and that they didn't really see like a high level of active recreation at the site being very feasible. And then we did have some other individual comments. A couple of people mentioning that they'd prefer that the costs just be kept low for this planning process, and that the targeted waste relocation and filter seemed the most feasible. Some people mentioned that that would at least be a good first step. And a couple of people said that they prefer the dump just be left as is. Then we also provided a long list for people to just kind of assess what are they interested in seeing, what are they not interested in seeing. So aligns pretty similarly to what we've been hearing. The blue bars at the top are what people are most interested in seeing. So a lot of lake, wetlands, wildlife conservation areas, walking trails, pollinator habitat, so more of that natural environment with a little bit of passive recreation, canoe paddling activities. And then as we go down, it goes to what people are not interested in. So that's more of that more developed future uses. So things like playgrounds, athletic fields. The bottom three is office/service related commercial development and warehouse manufacturing, any commercial development spaces people were not interested in seeing. And then people were also able to provide open-ended ideas of future uses they were or were not interested in seeing. So some of the comments that we saw, there were multiple comments about wanting the land to be managed in a cultural space operated by Dakota people, wanting historical and educational signage on the site. People suggested wildlife cameras, specifically for viewing bald eagles and some of the birds in the area. A couple of people mentioned campground facilities. There was a reference to trails for users with disabilities, dog park, bathrooms, those type of facilities. And then we have future uses people are not interested in, which were things like motorized boats, housing, anything that contributes to pollution that kind of ties back to people not wanting anything with like too much development. And then any fitness courses, and people also mentioned they did not want to see a dog park. So then we also collected some demographic information from the people who filled it out. So we had people identify which of the following best describes you. So as you can see, about 80% of the people who filled it out identified themselves as a community member, 7% environmental organization, another 7% for government employee, and 3% community organization, and 3% other. People were just able to fill in what they'd like. And then we also asked people, where do you live? And this was open-ended. So we had 100 people respond to that. And we had 66% of people say they're from St. Paul, 9% Minneapolis, 9% South St. Paul, some from Cottage Grove, Roseville, Amber Grove Heights, Maple Grove. And then there was a kind of a variety of list of different suburbs around the area. And then for age, as you can see, we had 65 and older was the highest age demographic with about 36%, and 18% were 55. So really about a little over 50% were above the age of 55, but then about half were below the age of 55, with the larger gap being between 35 and 44. We had 18%, and 22 and 34 were 15%. So it was actually kind of distributed a little bit equally, with 65 and older being the strongest age demographic. And then for race, we had 89% of people identify as white, and then 2% for Hispanic, Indigenous, Black, and 1% for Asian. And then we had one person identify as Native Hawaiian / Pacific Islander. And then some people put other for either preferring not to answer. And then I think we had one person write in Middle Eastern.
Right, so before we go to the public comment, we'll do question and answer on anything we presented with the slides.
I have a question. Has this information been shared with Betty McCollum's office?
No, the report, we're still in draft form. Our process to finalize, we want to have a discussion today. If you have any comments on the report, then we'll finalize it and post it on our webpage. That's our process for that. It'll be shared at that time when it's filed.
But no discussion through all this with her office?
With survey results specifically.
Okay.
Is that what you're asking? You're asking something, or the project in general?
Right, just an update on that, and was she involved or their office involved in the survey and understood that we were doing it? Those kind of things were.
Yeah.
Or are they totally waiting for the whole report to come?
Check in with them periodically through the process, but not specifically on this report.
Thank you. Other questions? Shared this morning. Any public questions about any of the slides? We're way ahead of schedule.
It has come before, and I think it would really be important to do is not identify that creating a new lake is that it's restoration of the historic lake. Just because people who aren't familiar with it, it's a different concept.
I understand what you're saying. Yeah. Question about the slides.
Also,
Any questions about what we presented so far?
yes, I guess the graphic that you're using showing the site, is that something that could be pulled up? I do have a couple other questions, but I think the graphic is kind of misleading. I'm reading it wrong.
Okay.
It was earlier on when you just set it up, not a live, but you're using a graphic showing where you have Battle Creek coming in to the body of water. There's Beaver Lake Creek coming into the body of water, and I believe the site is split by the railroad tracks, but you're not showing that. Am I not? Yeah. That graphic is all wrong. I mean, the rails come in between the water plant and Pig's Eye.
Comes up a little further over here is what you're saying.
Yeah, so that creek coming from the north is Beaver Creek. Battle Creek comes into the south end of Little Pig's Eye.
Yeah.
And then the railroad track that you're showing comes in between Pig's Eye and the treatment plant.
Yeah. There's a creek on this side. And there's a creek. This is just kind of a sketch, not an engineering drawing, but I know exactly what you're saying. It's if you look at the map, there are two creeks, but the location is a little bit off from reality. I think that's what you're saying.
Well, it's really messed up because Big Pig's Eye Lake is split with the rails going between it. So there's definitely a separation between there.
Maybe on the break, you can show me exactly what you're talking about. I'm not following at the moment. It's hard without pointing the map together. Yeah, let's disconnect that.
Yeah. And then the other question, I'm sorry, and then another question is, you kind of broke it down to 4 different groups or possibilities of looking at it. And there's surveys gone out and the surveys skewed heavily to 3 of the 4 options. That 4 option is there with very little support by that survey. Yeah. I'm just wondering, has the group here reached out to find out, is there a real demand that they need to put some type of commercial facilities at this location versus any other options that element has? Because it seems to me it's, if you look at it, at this point, there hasn't been any of that information addressed to the group saying that there is a demand that we should at least consider this as 25% of the option. I think at this point, I don't know what's supporting anything saying that we got to put in something that's out of the way, cut off by railroad tracks, in the floodplain, and a ton of other reasons why it probably shouldn't be commercial outside of the feel good of the green movement that was addressed. When you go to those types of places, you're going to get these types of responses. Now, have you gone out to those saying that we need industrial, we need the jobs, we need places to put pallets, whatever it is? And I don't know how that's supported so far in the process. And so it'd be easy for the group to get that out of there, and let's go for the 3 groups that are there, public support's there. The other thing is, do we have to do this? Are we required to dig this up or address the issue? Or can we ignore it like other communities have? Because if there's not an urgency saying that I have to do it, I don't know how I, as a public person, can support putting millions of dollars into something digging it out, turning around and turning it into a waste dump again. Thank you.
Couple things. First thing is about, more about industrial development. What's the need? Have we talked with the industrial users that are adjacent or other industrial users and really have them, given them a chance to express what their need for expansion of industrial? I mean, we've had a little bit of that from Met Council. I'd say we haven't had a lot of conversations with the railroad as yet, other than we've reached out and invited them to be engaged, to subscribe to the Gov delivery, to know what's going on. We haven't had sort of detailed conversations with them. So it's like the metro plant, the city of St. Paul waste facility, the wood chipping facility there. So we had a little bit of those discussions so far, but there are the railroad too. We haven't had those kind of discussions with them. And then I think you're also asking, what are the requirements to do? So it's a Superfund site in the state Superfund program. Yes, and with that comes all the investigation work we do to discover where the contamination is, and then following what the Superfund law prescribes, which is if there's a risk to human health, we would do what we can to do a claim. It doesn't prescribe certain detailed outcomes or certain ways to go or certain remedies. As a broad overall goal of preventing contamination in the environment and protecting human health. So with that larger goal, we're working on individual projects to try to get to that goal. It's not really specifics, it's a larger goal that is what the Superfund law talks about. Other questions about the slide so far? Yeah.
More of a comment. I was pleased to see the results that came back out of that because, having worked on this for many years, various planning processes, I think that the feedback really is representative of work that's been put into the city's plan and the federal plan and community, whenever we've had community meetings about how people really care about that area and want to protect it and restore it. That's what I take from those results, and I think those are ones that I've heard consistently for decades now.
Just the number of results speaks to that. People do care. Sure. Other question?
Yeah, and to follow on with what he said, and having walked there every Tuesday for 4 years, this looks like it doesn't include what I call Archery Park, even though I see trash was dumped up there. And I assumed that was, with the big rail yard in between. This just goes up to the rail yard north of there is, another lake, and there's almost 10 camps now. But when they did drilling, there's sampling, there's data from up there, and where it was drilled, there's trash coming out. So it's confusing now to me after all these meetings, what area we're actually talking. Anyway, so if you could clarify that. And then when I filled out the form, then I never saw anything about it being in a floodplain. And we've been picking up trash from the flood last summer, and it comes a third of the way up into the park. And so if people know that, they might be thinking differently about uses. But most people who fill the form out probably have never even been here. So, and then to not mention the floodplain, I guess I don't know why that's not a big factor when St. Paul has all these other parks and floodplains, and there's a lot known about how to have a park in a floodplain. So those are my two questions. Two big pieces that I didn't see in the survey, and I don't know why.
Yeah.
So.
And we did focus on Eastside Dump specifically. There's other sites that are adjacent, also are waste disposal, much smaller, much different sites. They're geographically close, but they're also very different. We're not really focusing on those for this.
Do they have PFAS?
Yeah.
And there's data, and if they do, it needs to come out too.
Yeah.
And why isn't it, part of a Superfund?
Well, I'm thinking of as a Superfund site. Let's talk more at the break. We can talk about that different sites.
Oh, I'm sure there's a mapper, that shows the actual site, which I assumed included up there too. But
yeah,
now I'm finding out. So that could be why you're not seeing that other railroad, because you were assuming that park was there too.
Well, yeah, the whole graphic is wrong. So
That floodplain part, is that?
I hope we communicated that in the video and the background information that this isn't a flood plain.
I didn't.
Any other questions?
Yeah, I was just, going back to the survey demographics, right? With other respondents, 89% white and over half being over age 55. How does that relate to the demographics of the surrounding area, the east side?
Yeah, definitely. I did pull some of the demographic info for specifically Battle Creek. I don't want to misspeak and have it memorized of the exact demographic, but you're right that 89% white does not align with the exact demographic of those areas. We specifically chose to flyer in that Battle Creek area because of those kind of surrounding communities that did have the most diversity. So we did take that into consideration. I can send you guys the tools that we use to pull the kind of demographic info. It's on a website called MN Compass. It's completely public. But yeah, I know for race specifically, I want to say white was somewhere around 50% for the area. Could be wrong. I don't want to misspeak. But and then I also looked at people in the poverty level, and then people, homeowners versus renters. So I can definitely send that out for you guys too to compare and take that into consideration. It's a good question.
Yeah, I think that'd be great. And I really appreciate that. And I know this is not a specific to this survey. I know that overall, right, when doing outreach, really, it's, trying to make sure underrepresented communities and individuals are included as always. It takes a lot of extra effort, right? So I appreciate the effort that was put into this and everything with it, but did just want to sort of note that that was pretty different than the demographics on the whole. The demographics on the whole of the east side, I think, to your point, majority non-white and very young, actually, really young. A lot of kids and young, and so sort of those voices. Just wanting to make sure that we're thinking about those voices too when we look at the responses of the community. But thank you for the work.
Yeah, I can look at adding that to the report too to kind of pull that comparison. That's a good point.
Kind of similar, but around a lot of the commentary I saw as well in the summary around getting feedback from the Dakota community to hear about what they're seeking in the future here. So I'm wondering if you could speak a little bit to any official liaison work that will happen as part of this process with the tribe specifically, or and related. If there's any way there in the background on this, we could thread in sort of the anthropologic history of this physical site, because it's been occupied for quite a while by humans, and this landfill on a timeline is, a small chunk of it. So I'm wondering where that storyline will get thread into either the report or sort of, future engagement specifically.
Yeah, do you want to talk about the engagement we had with Walk-On?
Yeah, definitely. So for what we've seen on the engagement side, we've had Walk-On TP show up at these meetings. We've had them come to some of our community meetings that we had in 2024. And then I don't know off the top of my head the exact number of people who identified as Indigenous in this survey, but we did hear some of that engagement from them. And Walk-On TP has been a partner and has helped us make sure that we have accurate information on the website. But as to any official liaison.
We can reach out through our tribal relations director and have those conversations with our park folks to touch base with. We do some updates, and I don't remember if this is one of them that we've updated in general.
Okay. Thanks. That's kind of from just what channels might exist for that official communication with the tribe, as that was a point of feedback that came out pretty loudly in this survey.
I just wanted to clarify because I was under the impression that, first of all, when Pigside landfill started, I thought I remembered it was not permitted even, because they didn't have permits back then. And I think that's important as we're looking forward and realizing what it wasn't and why it got to this point. But I thought that meant that they did not qualify for Superfund. Now, is there a state superfund and a federal? Because if it's superfund site, then there's generally going to be some funding that goes with that, isn't it? So superfund is what I wanted to know.
Yep.
Is it superfund site?
It's a Superfund site. Superfund, it's a legal structure for environmental liability. Superfund is a cleanup program on both the state and the federal level. And Superfund is also a fund of money of variable size at the federal level and the state level that government can use when the entity that caused the contamination is legally responsible. Either it's no longer around, or they're around, they're not viable. So it's those three things. Superfund is a very potent environmental law. It's got a scope of liability that is vast. When you try to do that on a dump, it doesn't quite work so well because everyone is liable. What that did is that created, at least in Minnesota, which is a unique case, it brought us to 1994. We need to have a better way of doing Superfund on dumps, and that was creation of a closed landfill program. There were some guardrails put around that. You have to be a permanent facility to get into the closed landfill program. So there are a number of waste disposal facilities. It's a dump. They didn't have a permit. It's still an environmental issue. Doesn't qualify for a closed landfill program, but it's now it's in the Superfund program. This is one of them. There are several. Is that helpful?
Yes, that's what I was trying to figure out. So it's the closed landfill as far as any funding possibility. Okay, thank you. I appreciate that.
We'll have more conversations too that dive deeper into funding sources, including brownfield funding, a whole other additional piece, Superfund liability, and that at a future meeting because it is very detailed.
Quick question related to Melanie's comment on the closest community. I assume there is not a way to know how many of the flyered homes participated in the survey, but they would have been if they did in the St. Paul part of this, where they lived kind of thing, right?
Yeah,
In the neighborhood,
yeah,
but
we
there's
didn't-
No other.
Right, and we went out flyering, after the survey was already posted. So I had that thought. We could have had people maybe identify how they heard about it. But yeah, no, we don't have an exact number of how many people the houses we flyered. Yeah.
Any other questions what we presented so far? Yeah.
Quick question. I've always wondered why 3M's not paying for this. And, that wasn't again mentioned in the survey when they're paying for the drinking water filters and, he's just, the line is right at the east edge of this, but it didn't include this, even though most of the pollutants are PFAS from their barrel.
I could address that one there. So in Washington County, there are 4 disposal sites that there were specific litigation on through the Superfund program, through the 2007 consent order. And those things emanate from that specific piece where they were found to be the responsible party, given that they were their dumps and their materials going into those facilities. And so that's what was done. If we were to go on this site and go through the Superfund process, as was mentioned by Hans, we would go then through a potential responsible party request and look through to see who disposed the waste. Maybe 3M did, maybe they didn't. Just the mere presence of PFAS doesn't necessarily mean it's 3M. It could have been other entities in addition. So that is a route through this Superfund process, and we'll have future conversations on that. That is a messy route, and we can talk about some of the limitations and advantages of that too. But this is not, 3M may have a role here, but it is not something that is because of PFAS, it's 3M.
And so the break came at an opportune time. We had a chance to build a slide that speaks to some of the demographic data. So we want to have that one last slide about demographics, and then we'll go into public comment.
I can maybe just join and share it.
Sure, yeah.
About that.
Or I can share it from my computer.
Okay.
That's just fine.
That works too. I just had time to pull it for the Battle Creek Highwood area. Not for those other neighboring ones, but you can at least kind of see what we got here.
It was up there.
It was, yes.
There we go. Okay, so I just pulled just some high level stuff real quick. So the Battle Creek Highwood area, it's pull up a map of it, but it goes a little bit north of 94 and then kind of in that map area that I showed earlier. But the census data has about 23,000 people for the population of the area. And then this you can see age, I just added up. Those are under 18. So as you can see, Melanie mentioned, it is kind of a younger demographic in that area. And then I was wrong on the race. It's about 70% of people identify as people of color in the Battle Creek Highwood area. And then for language, we had 23.3% of people say that they speak English less than very well. And a primary language, 45.9% of people said that their primary language is a language other than English. And then we also pulled the income poverty level for the area. So I pulled 21.2% of people said that they make less than $35,000. And then income under the 200% poverty level is 42.5%. That is higher for lower income population in the area. If I can pull this a little bit more and add that to the report so you guys can see a little bit more holistically and write up some comparisons of that data, the demographic data that we did pull from the survey. So not quite as representative of the area for sure, but yeah, definitely good takeaways there.
You're really good addition to the report.
Yeah.
Great work.
Definitely.
Thank you.
Yeah, no problem.
We'll switch over to the other.
Right, transitioning to public comment. Had some good discussion already. About the task force is kind of at the stage today of focusing on the reuse. We have the survey results. Any comment about anything? Public comment from folks in the room or online? Yes.
Thank you, Ron Cockrell. I've attended a couple of these meetings. Public aspect. I live in the area, been there for a long time. I'm sorry, I'm confused. I understand that there's two dumps in the area. The one I've always referred to in my mind is the dump on the north side of Little Pig's Eye Lake. And now there's the other dump, which seems to be more commercial, I guess. But if that's what they're talking about, closer to the wastewater treatment facility, some of my comments were all directed on the environmental side of it. And I think North Pig's Eye with Beaver Lake and Battle Creek Lake coming into it is an environmental gem. And it should be incorporated into the rest of the surrounding area. Regarding the second site, or the site that you've always been studying, but was not clear to me and other people that I know looking at this issue, I think that second dump that you're looking at, and it needs to be cleaned, and it's right next to the wastewater treatment site, I think lost honestly to a lot of the environmental value that I believe is in the area. And I don't know, I think it's something that, if the wastewater treatment site, which already has legislative mandate and a way to tax to take care of the process, if we can capture the plume that's coming out of that site and sending it right next door, and or working with them because they have needs to have larger pools to do things that they need to do. Can they not just incorporate the site and what they're already doing? Give it up to them and capture the plume. If you need to pull the junk out, pull the junk out. If you can just capture it and put a membrane on it, find out that. But yeah, I don't think there's a whole lot of environmental value left in that just by proximity of everything else that's going on. So I just needed to clear that. Clarification that we're dealing with two different dumps, and people who live there need to understand that. Because One has a very much an environmental piece to it. The other one is, in my mind, a lost cause on the environmental side of it. But if we can turn it into a way to collect the plume and make it a healthier, good example to the rest of us, working with the neighbor there, the wastewater treatment to capture the plume, I think is an option in my mind. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for your comments. Big side dump and then the smaller fish hatchery dump in the neighborhood, but a different site also in the Superfund program. Thanks for your comments. For the public comment period, I forgot to say it's helpful to state your name for the record.
Hey, I'm Kathy Seidel, and Pigside Park friend, walked there every Tuesday for 4 years at the site we're talking about, Pigside dump site. And so my question is, so in addition to clarifying that the northern part of the dump is not what we're talking about, even though the two are connected in the MPCA map, and it is being studied, but it's not funded for cleanup like this is. Then in addition to that, just the area we are studying, what's the way I see it after actually being there a lot, is it'd be helpful for people to know not just the floodplain part, but there's also, it has to be a really big, what I call a poop pipe. You flush your toilet, it goes into the wastewater system, and it's headed from the Val Creek Hills residential areas through where we're talking about, underground. And there's a big concrete thing with the manhole cover and a couple more manhole covers at the edge of the wood chip dump. And then it goes to underground to the waste treatment site, just like the huge metro area. There's pipes everywhere. Well, there's a big one right through where so if you're imagining having a big lake there, you got to deal with this poop pipe. And so it'd be helpful if maybe that's more detail than what people want to know, but it's big detail. It seems to me, just practically speaking, we went and looked at the concrete place the other day because it's all hidden by trees. Anyways, and it's right there, Battle Creek there. And the other question that I have for clarification about the area is I also assumed, because there is trash and monitoring going on under the very large wood chipping site that's part of the park, is that trash going to be hauled out too? Is that part of these dollar numbers, as well as the very large mountain of dirt that's dumped from the whole metro wide next to the wood chip site? All those trees come from the metro area. All the sewer construction dirt is taken there, and that's like a third of the park. And there's trash underneath it. Is that part of what we're talking about here too? And because then you got to move all that stuff to dig it out.
Yeah.
So there's two questions about the poop pipe and about the commercial uses that are already there.
Questions about existing infrastructure, how that works.
And how are you going to clean under it, and is that factored in with the cost?
Yeah. So those are all details of construction, important details that will influence the project. We've not got to the stage of that level of detail. These are high-level preliminary estimates.
But it does include the waste under those sites, is what it's a simple question.
Yeah, for the cost estimate.
So yes, it does include under those two sites.
There's some uncertainty about waste limits. There's some places it's obvious there's waste.
Right.
There's other places where there's probably waste, but we don't have a whole lot of data.
Right.
Yeah. That would be part of the details. So what are the limits of construction? And really firming up really waste volume estimates, which you need the area and also the thickness. This is an area where more data for us would be helpful. We know enough to make reasonable estimates. To get to a construction level, a little more data is needed.
But that would be by December of this year.
No, probably not. December this year is high-level recommendations from the task force. Once that is done, then there's an MPCA team in the Superfund. Well, there's an MPCA team working on the Pigside dump that would move forward with the task force recommendations. What are the next steps for actually doing something?
But it just is helpful because so many people making decisions are operating high level. To have it at high level, that a third of it is different than the other 2/3 as far as just hauling out trash because it's underneath wood chip piles and sewer piles and a big green building and it's a contract with a business and all that. Anyways, that's my comment. You said public comments, that's my comment. And then to know about this big hoop pipe going right through the middle of it, seems like it should be on the map. And so my comment.
Thank you for your comment.
Thank you.
I would,
Statement for the record.
Tom Diamond. I would just like to kind of focus back on where we started with this and what some of the intent over the years is. And that is that this area designated to be a park or planned to be a park from over a century ago. There are plans from 1910 that for this park. And when the regional park system was being established, this was one of the first ones who got on the list and work was being done on it. With the establishment of the national park, MNRA, Mississippi National River and Recreation Area, it largely came out of the efforts trying to get this area cleaned up and providing the natural area here. Governor Anderson was from the neighborhood. Congressman Bruce Vento was from the neighborhood, east side. And out of the challenges of trying to deal with this area, it broadened out to the metro area along for the MNRA park. But one of the things, and you talk about the demographics, what has happened with parks along the river is they often are either established in high income neighborhoods or better off neighborhoods economically, or they become that because of amenities. This area has been pushed back to the back of the list continually because, well, it's a big project. It's going to be tough to clean that up. And so we'll do this one over here. We'll do this one over here. And the people who live in this neighborhood, I've lived in St. Paul my whole life. I've lived in this neighborhood for 55 years. Really believe that it's our time. We're due. And when we talked to the legislature to get the funding for this study, there was great support. People really realized the importance of this regionally, and it's regionally designated, regionally significant, federally significant, and state significant. And we have resources, well, the rookeries, for example, it's just astounding. And this is one of the things that really frustrates me is you go down there any day, you'll see, egrets and eagles all over the place, wildlife, otters, beavers, the golden eagles. It's an astounding area, even with how poorly we've treated it. But those impacts are having impacts on the wildlife, and they impact people's ability to go there and enjoy it. So when we see about demographics, one of the things we should be saying is, how come in an area where it's a BIPOC majority, we're not investing the time and money to clean that up and make it accessible to the public? I believe that's really where we need to have leadership here, is that this is an important area for our region, for our nation. It's an important area as far as the population. The population is changing on this. And the meetings that we've had with, particularly the Somali community, I have been just impressed about the young Somali kids and stuff. And they out there, yes, we've got to, I won't even try to give the testimony that they have. It's just heartwarming about how, well, we've got to be protecting this wildlife and that they've seen and enjoyed in there. And the fact that we don't even have a sign on this, that it's a park, even though it is a park. We've got funding for that, but it just doesn't happen. We can do so much better. And we have this opportunity to do this wonderful thing for future generations that I hope we don't miss this opportunity. Thank you.
Thanks for your comment. Public comment online.
I want to mention something in the chat. Mike, you can go ahead and unmute if you want to expand on what you had mentioned. You mentioned that they weren't sure if they could connect live, but they were just commenting on Battle Creek wetlands. They said that equals 38 years and plus high tons of sewage and ash disposal from the Metro water treatment plant. That is Mike N.
Hi, can you folks hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Thank you very much. My name is Mike Navala. I worked for 30 years at the Metropolitan Council. I retired 5 years ago as a principal environmental scientist. So I was the #1 person for that 30 years for everyone having to do with pig's eyes. Hi, Hans, I want to be in that video with you. So my concern is that the natural environment, the groundwater, the parallel flow to the Mississippi River, the contaminants, Pig's Eye Lake, Battle Creek property lines do not matter. My gut instinct at the end of my tenure in 2020 is that a very potential source of PFAS contaminants would be what I call the Battle Creek wetlands. This is the property between the Metro plant and Battle Creek, which technically belongs to the Metropolitan Council. But for 38 years, from 1938 to 1976, the sewage, sludge, ash from the Metro plant was sluiced and filled in the wetlands. My calculations show over 500,000 tons of sewage, sludge, ash over 38 years. Now, we did a lot of analysis for heavy metals. We worked with Kurt Schrader. We worked with Hans Navy. We worked with countless people at the MPCA. But during my tenure there, this wetland was never sampled or analyzed for PFAS. And you can go out there today, you can see the rusty pipes that sluice the ash to the wetlands. And if you go down 6 inches, you will see a layer of rust-colored sewage sludge ash. So this area needs to be studied as well. I'm done.
Yeah, thanks for your comment, Mike. Yeah, this is an area where there's multiple sites, multiple sources of contamination. Former ash disposal from Metro plant is one of them, one of the contributing causes to contamination in the sediments and things like that. Sure. We have lots of metals data to show that, much less PFAS data. Thanks for reinforcing that point. Any other public comment? In addition to the last item on our agenda today, task force discussion. Knowing that we're in this period of working towards recommendations, both for remediation and restoration. We've got a report out on where the community, at least those who participated in the survey, were at the task force discussion. Oh, Aaron and I were talking about questions we might have to prompt the discussion. Maybe the first one we're thinking of is what jumped out at folks about the engagement report, anything that was interesting or surprising, or any conclusion from the report.
Well, first of all, staff and contractors, whoever worked on it, did a fantastic job. Because I know there were several places where I, not only as a task force member, getting it out to folks and saying, spread it even further, but the number of contacts basically that came back because of that was just, it was great to see all the work that went into this and reading the information. It was a little confusing. I don't know what the right word is even. It's not even confusing, but the fact that so many, the percentage that were over 55 was kind of startling to me. But at the same time, we got good information. And so, and I think a lot of times younger folks don't. Honestly, they're busy doing other things and they can, maybe we have more time as we get older. I don't know. Doesn't feel like that, but anyway. So a lot of compliments for how this was done because it's huge. And this was information that was so valuable and I've gone over it a few times now and gone, okay, yeah, that's right. This is where we're at with it. So as far as the tool or the implementation of it, I think it was just so well done and I kudos to everyone that worked on it. One of the things that actually Caleb and I were talking about, and I know you mentioned it to you as well, Hans, is that one of the things that I think we need to look at is we've been talking about digging it out, putting it someplace else, but what is there? Is there a lot of metal in it? Is there some way that we can figure out what would be in many ways mining it, but not really? I don't know what the right word is for it.
Extracting it.
Yes, I mean, we need to just digging it up and moving it. I've expressed that many times. That really concerns me because it's just moving whatever's there to someplace else and it's somebody else's backyard. It's not on the Mississippi River, which is a good thing, but it's still in somebody else's backyard and that seems wrong to me. So what we do with it when we are digging it up, if we can extract things from it, if we can figure out how to deal with the PFAS, because of to break apart PFAS, you have to have really high temperatures and stuff, but to really look at that when we're making our recommendations, it's not just dig it up and haul it someplace or whatever option makes the most sense. It's what are we actually doing with it? How can we make it so that it's not only cleaning up the pig's eye site, but wherever it happens to go to as well. And being realistic about what can be done. I think knowing the landfill capacity within 20 miles or whatever it was that we looked at, I don't know that that's feasible. I mean, we're gonna use up all the landfill space, which we shouldn't be putting it in landfills anyway, but I mean, the reality is this is where we're at today. We're trying to extract, I mean, with the Ramsey and Washington County project, which obviously I talked a lot about, we're trying to extract materials from that so that it doesn't end up being in the waste stream, that there is actually a use for it. And it's cleaner as far as PFAS and a number of different things. So I really hope that we can dig deeper into that so that it's like, okay, what recommendations are we going to make to, as far as what to do with it rather than just move it. I know we've talked about that before, but we haven't gotten into any details on that. So I would really like to see more on how are we going to make it better, wherever it's at. How are we going to make it better?
Do you have any suspicion on how much asbestos is mixed in this?
We did the, yes, good question. We did the drum removal and the trenching. We found asbestos. Yes.
Makes it really hard to do mechanical separation when you have asbestos because it spews the fibers into the air. Well, that's always a problem with mining landfills, is if the landfill took asbestos, you can't mine the landfill. Or at least it's very difficult.
This, I don't know if this is possible. Can we get crosstabs, so to speak, on the demographics and usage, and is that showing patterns? I know this is a small representation of numbers and that, but just your point of it and what was shown of what represents of the community versus those participating, if there was any differences. Maybe there wasn't. For instance, if we looked at it and the younger groups, which were underrepresented compared to the community, heavily believed in something else, such as the active use part. I think from my takeaway was I was fairly surprised active use was fairly low, and then a lot of actually not interested in it. Just given knowing what some other communities are going through in terms of planning and what they're seeing, and maybe it's something, St. Paul, if you've got information in general, what you're seeing of use and what folks are asking to that might match up to some degree. That's kind of some of my thoughts on that. But again, really good information here. I know from previous surveys on contaminated sites, many more participations here on the responses here. So that's a great reflection of staff and the contractor for the outreach.
Yeah, we can definitely pull that information. That's a good suggestion. So I can do that and add that to the report and send it out as well.
Just add a little bit of color to the feedback from the public around a campground use, and that in Washington County, part of our programs include regulation of campground. It's a state rule, and it does prohibit development of a campground in a floodplain. So I just wanted to make note of that. And then also, I think it's just the observation that if the area is not suitable for a campground, should a pile of trash be sitting underwater as well? Kind of a self-reflection.
We know it shouldn't be there, but.
Just something to, in my mind, also thinking about as we move forward towards the report and drafting, and it'd be good, I know there was some information about this when we first started, but maybe a refresher or reminder of how the task force report fits into the overall MPCA's work on the site. Sort of like what happens with the report, how does it get integrated into certain things, sort of who does it go to, even because as we're thinking about what's in it, sometimes I think it's helpful to know who gets it, what are they doing with it, how is the information being used, and where's sort of the recommendation going. So having that as a reminder and context, I think would be helpful moving forward.
We can talk a little bit about that. It does go back to the legislature. Part of the conversation was to help create one vision for it. There's a lot of folks that have had different conversations about it, but try to get one vision, then to steer our direction that way, but also then see funding. This project's going to need a large amount of funding, no matter which way we go. And I think really is build that support behind it. As for remediation, and Hans, please join here too. I mean, we could tackle it different ways. We could tackle it, just look at the data and say, this is what we're going to do to clean it up. And then you figure out, well, once we've done that, what the recreation is. Or you can design it on what is the recreation restoration, and then we can gear the remediation towards it. So we've talked about, we've previously done that first one. What do we need to do to clean it up to meet the environmental human health standards? And then, what happens from there happens. But I think if this group comes with a vision, this is what we want, we can flip our work and it will help direct more of our work too. So two pieces, one, legislature funding, 1, 2 kind of steers more some of our work on the nitty gritty parts that Hans has mentioned on, what are the environmental and human health efforts. But if other uses would be open too, I think that's what we're interested in.
Jimmy Francis, South St. Paul. And thanks everybody for all the updates and the work that's been done on this to keep this task force going. And I don't know if it behooves this, or we can, in this group, can we recommend that the state of Minnesota starts another landfill? Again, as a big picture person, would that help this project and other projects if that came out of this? Because obviously, putting that in any of the Dakota County things, as Dave has pointed out, is going to fill those to capacity. So what other options do we have? And if our group comes forward and says, suggests that perhaps one should be partnered with either this state, another state, or however, wherever that is, people that are in landfill business know more than I do. But would that be helpful to have that as part of this task force recommendation, so that then in 5 or 4 years or 9 years in the future that they're working on this, that was part of that, and maybe they start with that and then come back to this. In the meantime, do something to use the land or to start the process. I am of the thought that this does need to be dug out completely, because now it's not getting any cheaper, and it is, as everybody has told us, it's toxic. So again, my thoughts as we sit and talk about this is can we do that as a recommendation? Would that be helpful for this task force to discuss that as part of our recommendation moving forward? And maybe not necessarily pick out where it would be or any of those kinds of things, but just come to a conclusion that might be helpful for the state of Minnesota to have a new landfill built to today's standards that possibly could take this stuff and do something with it in the future.
Just to comment on that, I think we should look at all options. I think that one would be impossible at the state level, given the fact that the Waste Management Act. In fact, right now, the Association of Minnesota Counties is having its task force meeting on the solid waste management system and all of the regulations that are in place by the state. And even the landfills that are in greater Minnesota, they're facing huge costs associated with not being able to continue with them. And so that's something we're looking at. What can we do as far as facilities so that we can at least reduce the amount that just simply goes into the trash? But, I mean, we were supposed to have no new landfills, or basically nothing going to landfills according to the state legislature by 1991.
Since 91, did you say?
The Waste Management Act in 1985, maybe it was a little before that, but stated that by 1991, there would be no unprocessed waste going into landfills.
It of course has.
Well, yeah, we're not even close to that. But the reality is, the appetite for it doesn't mean we don't look at it, but the appetite for it, maybe there's some middle ground there where you have some sort of processing that makes it so that it's not as toxic, or you have some mechanism for, you can't pull out methane until it's a closed landfill, but something that goes along with that, because I think it would be very difficult to do, because no matter how you look at it, even a lined landfill, it will leak. It just will over time.
Well, and that dig and line option, I mean, that is a new landfill. It's just on the current site, so it doesn't have to go through all the permitting process MPCA would require for a brand new site. That is a new landfill built to modern standards, liners and leachate collection and gas recovery and destruction. So it's just at the spot that's already there.
As a member of the group that was highly recommended or referenced the over 55 white group, I was pleased to see that we're doing all this work on here. And I was especially happy to hear the comments from Mr. Diamond about the young Somalis that he's encountered that are interested in this, so that if we can get young people to support this, at least figuratively, I think that's positive as we look for ways to take care of this, because we talk about 10, 20, 30, 40-year projects that this is going to take. If we build that momentum starting now with the younger people, and as they become more prominent in the community, I think that's going to help us with our efforts. And this just occurred to me, and
please comment on this, but is there any possible way to use this material as a deep foundation on highway projects and then seal it with the concrete roadways that come in over the top of it? We're going to continue to build roadways all through the state. It's just an idea that popped into my mind. Is there some feedback I could get on that idea, please?
Like an engineering question.
I'll take that on engineering part of it, though. I think the big issue is what's underneath. You would need to build a liner system, and it would be a long, then kind of linear type landfill. The part of the issue at a really high level with landfill is one, what's on the bottom, how does it leak out, how does water get into it?
Okay.
And that's one issue where a roadway wouldn't do. The other is on the top. You're right, a hard cap would keep rain from going in, so it would help in that regard, but it doesn't address all the issues of how things can get in and out of the waste, and that's why modern landfills now have
The bottom as well.
Yep, a liner on the bottom and actually a collection system for the liquid that's in there, because waste inherently will have some liquid, and then the cap to keep water out where there isn't a working phase where rain is getting. Now, defer to others too here.
Well, I mean, it's, you can't build on a landfill because it's not stable. You're not gonna be able to build a road on it either. It degrades, it moves. It's not an engineered product. It's laid down very prescriptive fashion. I mean, you know that better than most, right? I mean, you couldn't build a levee out of this stuff. You certainly can't build a road out of this.
Searching wide and deep for answers.
Yeah.
All good ideas.
I think the conversation here and something that a commenter said too, probably spurred questions on what are the visions for commercial and industrial use. I don't know if we really talked about that as much. The survey is up as all or nothing, but we could do different pieces. I know there's interest on the edges of some of this. For instance, the current lumber yard, there's a lot of conversations I know with that company, potentially with areas just along the area connecting to spots. It's not the whole piece, but some that would allow for operations there, but also meet the wood waste needs of the larger metro area. I'm going to defer to Met Council. I know there's expansion needed for future environmental treatments and that. And I remember the graphic with an overlay on that. And I don't remember how much. I mean, I don't think it's an all or nothing. And maybe for me, I don't know if other members too, a little bit more concrete, at least on those two projects, what that could look like. I'm really interested in the comment of, is there waste sitting in the current lumber yard and I think that would be helpful. It doesn't have to be all or nothing. I'll just open, seeing that clearly natural passive use is very interested, and if it holds up with the more comparison of the demographics on the various areas, and it's pretty consistent, it seems to be a clear direction, but maybe it's on the edges, there's some commercial industrial wider needs, but then the main component be the natural or passive use. Folks are open to that kind of chopping up parts of it.
I think there could be a case for, Met Council's expansion in that industrial use, because again, I think it's good for everybody if that expands and we're able to do more with that and clean that stuff up. I just, my perception of that facility, it's well run, it's much needed, and it does do what it's supposed to do. And so having that as an option, I mean, I'm personally open to that, a bigger discussion of that as the industrial. I'm not really interested in new industrial coming into that site, but to make it work for the things that are there, absolutely should be on the table. And maybe, as the gentleman from the public had said, have that discussion so it can either stay in or come off the table, be on there or come off. And that point, in my thoughts, makes a good point to keep it in there, because that is a good use of industrial space.
Yes, I could add the Met Council land, which was referenced as some of it is occupied by heavy built infrastructure. that is protecting the environment every day and has been since the early 1930s, without any breaks. Although we've had some floods that have gotten in the way. And then there's some undeveloped, I'll just say, or there isn't heavy infrastructure on that Met Council land yet. But we know that when that plant there, the Metro plant, formerly known as the Pig's Eye plant, was first built, it's pretty tiny. And if you look at aerial photos over the years, it's only gotten bigger. And we think that trend is pretty reliable, that it will continue to get bigger, and we will ultimately end up using the full footprint of council-owned land, which is not where the dump is. Just so I'm saying, hopefully it's obvious, but also getting confirmation on that. And that land is zoned for this use and not particularly up for discussion, is my understanding. So eventually it'll look pretty industrial, although we'll make every attempt to help it fit into its surroundings. Then around the dump site, we have talked about the industrial or the commercial nature of the area, just for aligning what happens at the site to make sure that we're consistent with the overall feel of the area, or aware of it, let's just say. It would be different if this dump were in the middle of natural areas without a lot around it. But that's not the case. It's surrounded by a port, rail, highway, and other things that won't go away. They will continue to do what they do. So whether we're talking about industrial on the dump site or not on the dump site, right next to it, those uses will continue to be the case. That's what I thought the main emphasis was quite a while ago, actually, when we brought up the concept of industrial, just for context. I will add that there is infrastructure owned by the Met Council. It does appear to go under the dump, so I'll confirm that. I'm not exactly sure where that is. And we don't talk about the specific locations or nature of that due to national security. I'll just say that. So, but there is something there. It's very deep, so it is likely not, and never was, a factor in the actual dump or affecting it in and of itself. But we do serve a big portion of St. Paul and Washington County with that infrastructure.
Building on this theme of commercial, I just want to say thank you for folks who have been in the commercial sectors that surround this site that have given feedback to sort of their long range vision. And I guess I still remain slightly concerned around the railroad's lack of engagement in this process, and just want to call out that it sounds like they've been given opportunity to give feedback at points. And so I just want to make note of that again, that the railroad has not given feedback. I agree as well, sorry, that some Semstone and the wastewater treatment plant and a lot of the facilities there, they're going to remain. And just to be mindful that we should be mindful of that as task force members.
I do have a question. As far as what is designated parkland, what is the boundaries of that? Because I didn't think, like, for example, the wood waste facility, I didn't think that was in parkland. Is it?
It is. It is. They are operating on city parkland in violation of the charter of the city of St. Paul.
Well, I'm not gonna deal with the city of St. Paul. I mean, the fact of the matter is it's there because it's allowed to be there right now. I'm not gonna argue that, okay? I just want to know what the actual boundaries of the parkland are. I assume that the facility, or maybe I'm wrong there too, that the Met Council facility is not on parkland.
No.
Okay. So I don't know exactly where the parkland is. I guess I'd really like to know where
Don't have that at the top of my head.
I didn't expect you to.
In city and county. You're talking about parkland, right?
Sorry.
And I think that's the things that we really want to tease out. What are the information that's needed? I think this is probably our last request for those kind of things, just given the time frame. And even if today, if we could start, there are certain things that we for sure want to take off the table or want more information is a good piece. Like for instance, the conversation is that no new industrial, but maybe industrial commercial for existing uses. Is that something, or, you know, it is all natural passive. If there are some things we're leaning to already, I think that's going to help us narrow down, because future conversations, I know a lot of things are dependent, but if we could start narrowing down, what are the things folks are most open to or higher priorities? And then, because that'll help dictate the later conversations.
Helpful to me to see that the highest scoring, what was the term? Comfortable, very comfortable with was the natural area. I appreciated getting that. I'll just say it seems like objective input, a clear signal on what those near that site prefer. And with a passive use, a close second to that. It also stood out that the public wants the material gone. Sorry for those in the room who would say like, duh, we've been saying that for a long time. But it helps to know what the public is really clear about. And there's no mistake about that in the findings. I want to second the inquiry into, it's nice to say gone, but that seems like an impossible task, not even related to dollars, like nowhere to take it. Is there a way to open the scope of what that could mean? For example, this site it's on a port, frankly, and there are barges there. Is there another way to move it? The rail yard next to it, is that another way to move it? Where could it go? Is it just in the 7-county metro area, or can it go further than that in Minnesota or beyond Minnesota? It would be helpful to know what those, the full extent of options, whether they're viable or legal or anything like that.
That does kind of come back to what I was saying before. There's some way to detoxify, pull something out or whatever it does. We have to have that as part of the plan, because just picking it up and moving it to something else's bag. We've got to figure out what to make it less environmentally destructive.
Gotcha. Is there more?
Slightly different, but back to Kirk, where you were talking about the active versus passive, or I was talking about that. I think we should also be very clear when we're talking about what constitutes active use, because I think in the survey at some point I'd seen like hiking trails were listed under the active use. And I think a lot of people sort of in the general public might consider that more of a passive use, like a walking path and that sort of thing. And so just being, to me, there's a big difference between a playground and, you know, a dirt walking path, right? Or a soccer field versus that. So just wanting to make sure that if we're looking at active versus passive uses and when we're talking about it, that we're being super clear amongst ourselves and in the, you know, whatever report as what we think constitutes passive use and what would fall under that umbrella versus active use.
Hans, could you clarify, Fowler, former council employee, he talked about that ash, the ash disposal area. Is that considered part of the dump? that we're talking about, or where's it not?
No, it's a separate site.
Separate.
I mean,
Except
worked
for-
with him before, he does have a lot of data,
Yeah,
but it's not.
so there's Bad Council ash on the Pig's Eye site, yes. And there's also sludge incinerator ash at other, an adjacent area that's a separate site, also contributes to contamination in Pig's Eye Lake. Both of those are true.
Are we expected to make recommendations regarding funding as well? Because that was one of the things that be careful not to try to push it off all on one. It's a bigger problem than just where it's at. And so I hope that if we're expected to do something with that and not, there may need to be a new source that we would recommend or whatever. But I do think that we need to somehow address the financial aspects of this and how it gets paid for. Because we can say, this is what we want to do, this is what it would cost, but if there's no way to fund it, we need to make it pretty clear that it needs to be funded and it needs to be multifaceted.
Is that, not to be adversarial, but is that the role of this task force to find funding? Or is it our role to tell them what we think it should do and then the state or whoever authorized us to be in this task force can then say, okay, we need to go.
Okay. I need to be clearer then, because I'm not saying that we need to identify what the source is, but that we're very careful not to point fingers.
Sure.
Because that's when we get into trouble, because then it's like, well, they should pay more, they should pay more.
Yeah,
You know what?
I agree.
This is the cost. And we need to figure out how to fund it. That is not pointing fingers at because it's been there so long. I mean, it's hard to actually identify who's to blame.
And to that, I'm sure, I mean, maybe you can tell us, those that have dug into this, that once those things are tested, that's when they start to figure out that XYZ company dumped this here, or this was a solvent from ABC agency or whatever, I think, right? Is that how that would work?
Yeah, we're planning to come back and spend a day, a good chunk to talk about funding options. So part of it will be if we use the Superfund process, if we use the brownfield grant programs existing. Melcat is something that is available already. This qualifies under the law, what that would look like. And then I do think because of the cost on many of these, there is going to have to be discussion of new programs or new funding pieces, whether it's through existing channels or new programs that we may want to create. I know that's one thing we will have some more conversations with the congressional members too, is just how funding currently is flowing through them versus one project versus you have to create a program for it. So I think we'll be able to talk about some of that. I'll just throw it out there for conversation. I think a report that says, especially if we're looking for more money than those other things may have available, if that's something we do, a recommendation for that may be more powerful to help that next step, especially if we go to congressional or state ask that, there are these needs. I think that would be helpful potentially, but we could talk about it if folks are comfortable, but funding will definitely be talked about in the report, because I think the legislature next question will be, so how are we going to fund this? So we can at least start the conversation and we can then as a group determine how comfortable we are maybe saying, we recommend if you do something, you look at these three, maybe not these two.
Yeah, I'm second having that conversation because like just the whole liability, we don't want to put one of these forward and then just have no idea where that money could come from. We don't need to get into the weeds of those specifics, I think, but having that will just help push the conversation forward, I think, right? By knowing there's these identified potential pots, where could any extra money come from? Have similar projects, what type of funding have they been able to pull, just to understand? I don't like that. This is doesn't get messy, as we try to get creative as well. And I don't want the report to come out with, a pie in the sky idea that just has absolutely no funding chance. So I very much am hoping that we have that general funding conversation, that we're able to add that piece to this. Again, not specifics, I don't know that that's our role, but be able to show that we've thought that through with our recommendations as well, that we are not doing this, this process without funding in mind. And we haven't been, right? We've all been talking about it, and I think our report needs to reflect that we've thought about it at a level too.
So the option that we're just pulling the waste back from the edges and putting filtration, does that also include regrading and capping? Or just pulling it back and?
So waste to get pulled back, we would have to, there'd be decisions about then what? Does that waste go off-site? Is that waste, I think the current cost has remaining on, so that is no waste leaving the site, is my understanding. So that there could be some hybrids where some of that leaves the site. And then the cap is essentially the cap that's in there now, which is the impermeable soil.
Yeah, and no slope.
And no slope.
It's permeable or impermeable?
No, it's a soil cover. I wouldn't call it a cap, I'd call it
No, it's not a
dirt
cap.
that's covered.
It's a growing media on top of the waste. It's not
Exactly.
sloped or capped.
Where we do get that is the dig and line option, where we're approaching more what would be required for a landfill. There's a slope, there's a cap, there's all the right things.
Is there a hybrid option between those two?
Well, if your goal, and I think the goal is to at least mitigate the contamination that's leaving the landfill. Worst case scenario, we leave waste there. But the only way to prevent that is you have to stop water infiltrating into the landfill, right? Because the water infiltrates through rain, snow. Right now, we've been out there. It's flat. It's hilly. You build a landfill now, 5-to-1 slope is the rule. Most landfills go to 3-to-1 slope, right? And then it's flat and it's capped. It's got a synthetic, HDPE liner. And then on top of that, you put soil as a growing media. And then you put grass and then you mow it forever. So that then all roots can, but like right now, if I was doing an inspection at that landfill, my violation list would be multiple pages, right? So any MPCA inspector went out there. First of all, cut the damn trees down. That'd be the first thing we'd say. Every tree that's on the waste has to be cut down, right? Because that's just infiltrating, destroying the cap even more. So to bring this into even a not modern landfill, but protective of at least keeping the water flowing through, you have to regrade it and cap it. You're moving a lot of waste no matter what. I would never recommend an option that leaves it the way it looks now.
What I'm hearing though, it would be good for us to do an enhanced or synthetic cap, reshaping, capping estimate 2 should be in the report. Because right now that's not, the 30 million is just rolling back.
Yeah, I don't know how we could, recommend that. It really doesn't do it. It doesn't prevent anything from leaving the landfill and going into, it just maybe pulls it back from the water. But we know the water's up under the waste anyway, so
Yeah.
I don't know that you really can pull the waste back from the water.
This is like approaching, this is a lower version of the dig and line. This is like, there's a cap, there's no liner. We're trying to get closer to what it should be, but still not quite there.
Yeah, I mean, and if we're looking for, I'm probably the only licensed landfill inspector here, right? I've been doing this for a very long time. In my mind, and then, as a representative of Dakota County, we don't want the waste to come to Dakota County. We just really don't. There's a lot of negative impacts to Dakota County. And the landfill that would take it is on the Minnesota River. So we'd be moving it off the Mississippi River, but onto the Minnesota River. The north berm of the landfill is the Army Corps levee. Right? So now the landfill's not supposed to leak. It's a modern landfill liner, right? We know that's going to work forever. So there's issues. I like your idea of the railroad or whoever was in the BART and stuff like that. Certainly worth looking into. But but anything short of a dig and line, isn't protective into the future, right? I know it's not a great site, but I know your engineers can design a landfill that is modern and will mitigate the system as well as any other landfill we'd be moving it to. Probably better because I trust the MPCA staff to design it and build it as opposed to a private company, right? We're going to oversee them. Well, you guys aren't going to cut any corners, right? I mean, I worked with you guys for 35 years. You know what you're doing, okay? But anything short, I'm not a proponent of the dig and haul. I know there's a lot of people that are, but I'm not. It's too expensive and it's got to go somewhere else. It doesn't get rid of the waste. Moves it off a site that's literally surrounded in an industrial. It's not the North Shore where we're restoring back to something that's pristine, lined in industrial sites. So, and you move it, you can make it much smaller. It's going to be obvious. I'm not going to say it's going to be a big green pyramid, right? That you're going to have to maintain forever. But anywhere else it moves to, you have that same issue. So that would be what I'd be at. For what we've seen so far, dig and line, I think, is the only reasonable option, even though it costs a crazy amount of money. But it would be protective. But it would not get to what some people want is back to pre-colonization view of that part of the river.
Again, when we're talking about capping it, as a hybrid option, right, to make it a little better. But like you mentioned, we're gonna get water coming in from the lake anyways, right, in that medium. Is capping it, is there really benefit to that, from a cost? I mean, I don't know, maybe that's someone.
It'd be a lot cheaper because you're not digging it up. You'd just be regrading it. And so the waste that's in the water now, right? Probably most of what's going to leave has left. Water comes up, goes down, up, comes down, up, down. How long has it been that got waste? 30.
72 it closed.
Yeah. So probably most of that's leached out. So the only way you add more to that is taking new water, percolating it through, right?
Yeah.
So if you stop that, you're going to dramatically reduce the amount of contaminants that can leave the site. Wouldn't eliminate it.
Yeah.
You dramatically reduce it.
I think the challenge is when we're seeing this nationally too, at landfills is, it's at the bottom. Some old landfills are in a spot where the groundwater is not coming up into them, and you could do that. And we have done it as a state, in other places, but this one is challenging because groundwater keeps coming up where, hands cover is.
In the groundwater, right?
Yeah, I wouldn't recommend it for this site, but it would be better than not doing nothing. And I don't like the idea of all of if we just pull waste back and leave and just spread it out even more and leave everything this undulated with no cap. We're gonna spend a lot of money for almost no benefit.
Do you see benefit? I mean, even with the groundwater, actually keeping rain falling from the sky and filtrating it. Yeah, okay.
So
Hans, would you mind pulling back up those pictures? And I know they're not the scale representative. I think that they're a great reference to help folks visualize, especially those who are not in there. The dig and line does envision some natural area.
Yes.
Part of Pig's Eye Lake is expanded. There could be some walking trails. So there could be some of that, but I don't know if the graphic there is representative. But new Pig's Eye landfill, will be the same height of the bluff. So I don't know if those in the neighborhood, that's what, 100 feet or?
100.
This part we did try to make representative because it's an important point.
And how tall is it? I mean, so it would be a mound equal to the bluff there, and I don't know.
Change the experience at Battle Creek Park. Sure.
Can you do that with the airport right there? Go that high?
Yeah. For the things we need to talk about that.
Just checking because we have restrictions too for our buildings.
but it won't have any trees on it.
And is the assumption of that, looking at the operating costs, since MPCA is doing sort of the monitoring operating now, that they would continue to do so?
Say that again.
With just looking at the operating, right, and the ongoing costs, as MPCA, as I understand it, is doing sort of the operating monitoring, et cetera, of it now, would that continue?
This is, where would the 45
Who would be
million
doing that?
year come from?
Hans would be.
It would be dependent on who's operating the facility. I mean, there are some monitoring costs in that, but it's very small compared to that, because we would now have active systems. We'd have leachate that would have to likely go next door. To the wastewater plant, we would have more maintenance. We'd have a gas system, I'm assuming, well, there isn't as much organic material, there's still that there. So there would be those type of costs that we would have to find a funding source for.
30-year operating cost, 45 million.
Is that annually total?
30 years.
Over 30 years. Right, that's still many for the million a year. And I bring that up, Dave, to your point of like not having the space or wanting it, Dakota County. That's not, we cannot go in with an assumption that the city could cover that cost of that 30 years of that, right? And so thinking about not just the cost of the action being taken, but who's doing that next 30 years and who's responsible for that cost.
Operating costs at a landfill, say, would probably end up at a private landfill if it moved. You're basically paying that with the tip fee, right? Because they have to maintain it until the MPCA is a final closure, and then the state takes care of it. But that, I don't think that time period is known. It's 30 years for sure after it's closed.
So how that would break with all of these options, understanding how the 30 years of operations works and responsibility and, financial and otherwise, I think would be helpful information to have.
I think you can kind of see it if you go to the next one where it's just dig and haul, no backfill, if you don't mind. This 720 to what was it, 530 is that upfront difference that you were talking about, and you can see then the resulting difference in the operating cost. It's a trade-off. Will be less upfront costs, and even if you look at 30 years, less to keep it on site, but it is perpetuity.
Feels like we're making progress.
I'm glad we have a professional landfill inspector here. Honestly, that's really going to help. I think as we are looking at, okay, what does it really mean?
He knows a little bit about landfills too, though.
Can I ask a general question about the final recommendation? As a group, are we hoping to only be putting forward one main recommendation from these four, or are we going to try to flesh out a couple of these? Are we going to be giving some details on all four of these if they were to move forward, or how are you all envisioning a final recommendation? Or are we not there yet to know, here's this one and this is what we're going to try to identify as like our main push? But if you don't find funding for this, is there like here's our plan B for how you could do that? I don't know that we've really gotten into beyond having these four options. How are we presenting this ultimately at the end? Or maybe this is too early for that question.
I have no interest in recommending the first one. I don't know if anybody else does. I know the cost is substantially cheaper, but that doesn't really do anything.
Is there a hybrid that
Talk a little bit about that might, some variation of that may cost a little bit more, maybe provide a little more benefits.
Yeah. Hybrid.
You're talking about something basically between 1 and 4, right? Between the targeted waste relocation and the dig in line.
Yeah, and or
Those
just
two.
remove it all, right? Also, yeah.
Just,
I mean, I think there'd be incremental steps of betterments, right? Like maybe we need to think about what those steps are. They're gonna cost money, but hopefully, improve the situation, reduce the contaminants leaving the site, right? I mean, that would help. I mean, again, funding's gonna be a thing. But what ultimately can be afforded, and if we could kind of say, hey, the sky was the limit, we picked this, but the sky's not the limit, right? And we can step down to different increments that provide different levels of benefits or reduce risk by increments. And yes, that's sort of the way I mean, that's how I look at it. That's kind of how we look at feasibility studies in the core too, as like incremental benefits and what are you buying? What's your bang for your buck for those increments, right? And sometimes you hit a point where it's like diminishing returns, right? Like we've done everything we can do and nothing else is really cost effective anymore.
Go to the one that shows the backfilling the lake after it's dug up. I don't know why we would do that if we dug out all the waste. I would then fill the hole back in again. I mean, that would just, it would give you more land to work with.
Recreate, right?
Yeah, but why would you do that? I mean, that's $100 million to
High cost recreation land.
would be very high cost. And I think when you look at what the stakeholder engagement showed, they want the natural area. So don't create a wetland and then fill it back in. So I mean, I'm willing to take that one off the table. I don't know what other people think of. Also the most expensive one, and I don't know that it gives us what we want.
I think the report will talk a little bit about each of them, but how we, if it's one recommendation or a couple, that is up to the group. I know just from some previous conversations, there seemed to be willingness to do a couple things, a range. So it's not one. What I'm hearing, it sounds like too, that's still kind of there. We're probably not going to be all these that we mentioned, the background and how we got there, but here's our one or two that, based on these considerations.
I just want to reinforce that we've already talked about with the targeted waste relocation filter. This is also not without its challenges. But the effectiveness really comes down to how good is that filtering media. We need a better filtering media than the one we have now. And so one is how good is it to get the leachate to flow through it? Is it going to flow under it? Is it going to flow different? So those are two key things. Will it go through it? And how effective is it at removing contamination? There's work to do around both of those things. This is also has challenges and a few unknowns.
I think also when we look at funding, we're looking at government funding, federal, state, hopefully, and trying to narrow it down any further. Well, everybody has to be a part of it, I guess. But one of the things that has to be understood is if we're taking it out and taking it someplace else and can't show that we're making it not as toxic, trying to get funding from the state legislature is going to be nearly impossible because it would be, wait a minute, you're taking it out of Zhang's area and you're putting it over in mine? I don't think so. And it does, even in the metro area, that would be an issue. So I think one of the things that happened before, because this has been studied a few times already, and where it seemed to fall apart was when it came to how much it was going to cost and who was going to pay for it. And then suddenly everybody was like scattering. And that's how come I said from the beginning that we really need to look at, trying to say this person or that person, but entity or that entity is responsible. The fact is we don't even know. I mean, it's been there for so long, it closed for so long. It's hard to do that. So trying to come up with something that will show that we're trying to do the right thing environmentally. And we hadn't really talked that much about what we would do with what we pull out if we pull something out. But I think it's got to be a discussion that we have to include in our recommendation, or it's not going to go anywhere. Everybody's going to say, well, why would you bring it to my backyard?
And to continue with that funding conversation, whether, we would be interested in recommending that there be a creation of a new funding source at the state, and maybe that would be obviously beneficial for this purpose, but what other ones are there, and that this is a larger issue than just Pig's Eye, and there needs to be a larger solution, which would be a new funding source at the state level or, or whatever. But yeah.
And again, I think that the Association of Minnesota Counties, because right now, counties have the responsibility for waste. And to think that, it doesn't matter which county you're in, to make that go on to just the county taxpayers, it's not really feasible, and that's why there's so much interest in it this time.
Well, and thinking back to the demographic information that was added and looking at, when you're talking about the city or the county and you're talking about resources that aren't there with the residents for paying for this, right? Versus a statewide, a new funding source, something like that. So just putting that out there in terms of, right, not saying that we would come up with specifically what it is, et cetera, but also trying to think bigger. And if there's a recommendation to the state legislature that, yes, Pig's Eye, and you should help solve for the larger problem and be thinking creatively about it.
And even when we talk about funding, we talk about school, subcommittee on recycling and the environment. If that money was actually going towards the environment, I mean, we have a system set up that we could plug into that would be for this purpose. Because I don't see it coming little pots everywhere. I do think that likely we will be talking about something that either expands an existing funding source or redirects.
Just gonna piggyback on something Dave said. So back to the dig and haul and back though, I mean, I think what you're saying there, I'll just echo, some points there is, it is the same level of dig and haul, backfill, dig and haul, no backfill, dig and line, provide the same level of protectiveness in all three. From an agency's perspective, that's what we're looking for. So it meets our criteria or triggers for it. Just looking at the results here, the backfill really is only if we want active recreation. And I don't see that from the community here. They would rather there be a lake there or passive natural areas. So I, supportive of that concept that if we're trying to, if today's goal somewhat is to try to say which ones we want more information on, which ones are, maybe we should not talk about as much, throw some support to the dig and backfill is probably not the one moving forward.
Also, you say you would not vote for the relocation filter, the low-cost option. You wouldn't.
I don't think it's gonna work personally. I don't know how you direct the leachate through the filter. In my mind, I'm repeating myself, but the lowest cost option that meets the protection level that needs to happen is the dig and line. It also, how much greenhouse gases are going to be emitted just moving all this waste to wherever it's going to go. And then on top of that, I think people envision that we're like moving dump trucks of dirt. We're not. We're moving dump trucks of waste. There's going to be methane coming off of it. There's going to be asbestos coming off of it. There's going to be whatever else. It's going to be wet. You can't load a truck with wet waste and then drive it down the road. So you're going to have to stockpile it while it dries out before you can move it down the road. I don't know that you have those prices built in. I've seen some of this stuff done, even just in dredgings. How long does it take dredgings to dry out? Months. Okay, so I think your time frame of how fast we can move this.
Till it and dry it, and it's a lot of work.
It doesn't passively dry out. And while it's drying, this is waste. We require waste to be covered every day at a landfill, right? To prevent vectors, right, and exposures. We can't dry out covered waste. So it's like, I don't actually know how you move this waste safely and even legally. I can't envision how you do it, right? You dig up 1,000 yards and you find a place to dry it out. You wait 2 months, you move that. You dig up how do you do that without creating more exposures? All this wet waste has been in an anaerobic environment, right? And now you're going to introduce it into an aerobic environment. Degradation that hasn't happened is going to start happening. But the methane that's in there is even the dig and line is going to be a mess.
We've seen this at other sites when we go in and do some work. The methane production ramps up as we introduce oxygen to it and the whole thing kickstarts.
Right.
But the one thing on moving, I don't want to say waste like this, but you know, right now we've been dealing with a lot of wildfire recovery stuff. And what they do is they take a dump truck and they put plastic in the bottom, right? And we put the waste in and then we wrap this thing like a burrito in there to try to minimize some of the concerns you have. I mean, talking about stuff coming out of the back of a dump truck and all that, right? So very costly, time consuming. And I mean, that's how we have to do it to get the ash and stuff removed. But again, there's lots of stuff in there too that can be airborne really easily.
Talking like what, 500,000 truckloads? Maybe more?
You're gonna have that with either of those options, though, right? Even if you're doing the new landfill, you're gonna need to be moving it somewhere, drying it before you would
No,
restack
you
it,
can-
or it would go in.
You'll be able to move that right in there because you're just taking the same waste and you're putting it in there. It'll have a leachate collection system built into it. So you'll be able to collect the leachate. So no, you won't have to do that. You construct the new, you'll have to move waste out of where you're gonna build the new landfill, but they'll put it back on top of the old waste. You won't build any kind of liner, you're just gonna move it. It's already there and build your new liner or the new, or where the waste is gone. So that's not, you probably have to bring it up. Yeah, because you can't build it in the groundwater. No, and then once you bring it up to the level it needs to be, you'll construct your new liner, and the waste will just go in there. It'll just be, it can be much bigger trucks, can be the kind of trucks you use in you know, mining operations, versus the trucks that can go down the road.
Road dump trucks.
Right, and they're huge, and that, you know, you'll probably make a fourth as many trips. And you can make it look okay. It's gonna be a green hill, but you don't, I've seen these, they don't look terrible, and you probably won't go to 3-to-1, right? Okay.
Before detailed
Well, you're not gonna do the slope you have in your drawing there, I know that.
We wanted to make it.
That's 1-to-1.
Yeah, we didn't want this point to be lost, that it would be
Yeah.
a significant topographic
Right.
change.
Yep.
For people.
You have a height estimate,
Love it.
but height of the bluff.
And the bluff is what we're going with right now.
We'd previously talked a little bit about the flood risk in this scenario as well of the, can Dave and others just speak to kind of like the existing modern landfills, proximity from flooding sources
You
and
build a berm up around so you go to establish your bottom height, and your hydrogeologist will do that, right? And then you build the berm around so that this liner can be like this, because the liner has to be sloped in, so you build a berm around. Army Corps will get involved in that berm so that it meets the levee requirements. That's what they do at Burnsville landfill. So that berm on Burnsville Center landfill on their north edge is approved by Army Corps.
and on the creek side, I'm also thinking about, you know, like a 1 in 500 or 1 in 1,000 year flood with the increasing rain events.
I would
and
think the
how
berm
that-
around the whole thing would have to be equivalent of a levee. I don't know why the north side would be any different than the south side in this particular case. But you got talented people on your staff that would be able to calculate all that. So the berm will be a little more expensive, but not substantially, because it's really just engineered.
It's clay. It's
Yeah.
clay.
It's clay now. I mean, I think the Burnsville's levee, the berm on the north side, that's the levee, is a little bit more expensive than the berms in another spot, but not even as much that they really complain about.
And I guess most important, like effective, or there's not, we're not seeing issues with previous designs of landfills now being met with rain events or flood events that were not originally projected, or they're adequately protected.
Not that I'm
In the
familiar with. Obviously, this one has some problem.
We review with more than what's kind of out there now. When we did Burnsville landfill, we looked at stormwater events and flooding events of a much more realistic than history, more similar to what we're seeing now because of climate change and intense rainfalls. We also did look back at the historical flooding for the Minnesota there. We could do the same here, look at the historical record of Mississippi flooding and know that the future probably will be wetter and more intense situations.
Plenty of information. We can help with that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Just to reinforce, from previous meetings, the flood, there's a flood risk during construction. Protect against when the waste is open or moving it. And there's a flood risk for the facility long-term once it's constructed. Both are important.
Is there a difference in that flood risk between these scenarios, or how much that risk needs to be controlled during the interim phase while work is ongoing?
For anytime we're digging up the construction, flood risk is there. Sure. Then it's of course, if we have a facility there, then there's a long-term risk of it. If there's not a long facility, then it doesn't exist.
If you remember, there really is no flood protection for today.
Right now, yes.
So every, during construction or the long term, which definitely the infrastructure asset will need to be protected, it will be degrees more.
I think even the monitoring wells flood now.
Designed specifically to, yeah.
So, specifically for the dig in line, when you're talking about doing this, are we talking, it takes a year, it takes 6 months? I mean,
10
what's the
years.
timing? 10 years to actually get it done?
An estimate is they'll be refined once there's more detail involved.
So the flood risk then goes for that, the whole length of time?
I imagine wouldn't be year-long construction. And at some years when there's more flooding potential, it'd be like an alternate. So I'm imagining some of the construction flood risk would be when we choose to do the work.
That makes sense.
It was like
I was just trying to figure out.
probably a lot of winter construction. Just looking at the clock, we've got about 20 minutes left. Are we covering the things that are important today? We're making progress on moving towards recommendations. What's important that we haven't talked about yet today? Wondering if it's helpful at the end here, just to check in with how each one of you is feeling, but where we are, where we're going, progress. Any like final things to share? Looks like we're getting near the end today. That'd be helpful today.
Yeah, just for clarification, we are going to have a specific meeting about funding discussion, right? And then Kurt, you were talking about expanding that industrial option, knowledge of that or what that would mean, right? Is that part of a next conversation, or could that be as part of?
Yeah, if folks are interested in that, myself, really interested on those of the known assets there already,
Yeah.
like the wood yard and my council, I know you have property, but I know you showed some design and I can't remember if that was for nitrate, but I don't know if that was for PFAS. So, additional treatments will need more space and just longer understanding from both of those.
Yeah.
For me would be helpful. I don't know about the others industries there. I don't know if the railroads have more interest of expanding. I'll just speak just for myself. I think those that also have co-environmental natural resource benefits, such as a wastewater plant or a wood waste solution, tend to have a higher priority than, say, like you said, no new warehouses and I'll just speak for myself again, the railroad, the expansion there of the railroad, the lesser than the potential other environmental benefit pieces.
Yeah, again, maybe those two conversations could happen at the same time, or that presentation of that information, as well as I think we do need to have a funding discussion, as we've all agreed to. And then maybe again, for David's point, as a policymaker, I've always I've seen that offering a couple of options has been beneficial in presenting things to people, so that we don't have to come back, or people don't have to come back and regroup to be able to go back to another option, say, well, what about that one? So that might be part of that discussion as well. That could help us present two things, or label all those as 1, 2, 3, 4, so that it's the same discussion, but what our priorities were in a percentage, for what that's worth.
Yeah, it's helpful.
I'm just gonna go around the table. Well, first of all, this has been really reading, trying to figure out, other than we kind of dug into it a little bit, and I don't know, when we talk about landfills, that's maybe not the best analogy. But has really helped me broke things down a little bit. Funding and all of that is separate from that, but, what's realistic? I would think that ultimately, we would probably be looking at maybe 2 scenarios. I would not go with all 4. Because, the legislators are gonna want to be able to debate a little bit, but having all 4 doesn't make any sense to me. And so I guess, Jay, you've really helped me figure out what are we trying to accomplish here? And how can we do that? And realistically get it done so that we're protecting the environment. So I really appreciate your input.
Well, I appreciate that we've been able to maybe narrow down a little bit our options here. That's been helpful. I think I would agree that the backfill one, really probably one that isn't in line with the overall goals of the site, what the public wants for the site. And it's good to hear from Dave about just the first option, the targeted waste relocation, just being really insufficient to protect the environment. So that's positive progress. I think for the 2 remaining ones, I think we have questions about hauling. Sam brought up, are there other ways to haul this waste? Are there creative ways to haul this waste? With the digger line. Interesting to have a visual of what that would look like.
We'd be happy to come back from the Met Council and share more information on the future of that site. Because we work in partnership, I'll just say, with the MPCA to determine how to use that site. That there is uncertainty about what, when, but personal opinion, and I think it's backed up, is that when doesn't mean if. We always try to do more to protect the environment and do more with wastewater recovery technologies. So as time goes on, whether it's 10, 20, 50, 100 years, there is likely going to be use of the Met Council, or if you look at the parcel map, the Waste Control Commission land adjacent to this site, actually adjacent to Ramsey County Parkland. I'll add, just overall, I really appreciated the clarity we achieved today on what the public envisions, or at least a significant part of the public. I would like more clarity on the tribal voices and intent as well. I know that already came up. And the Met Council has liaison staff that have already attended and potentially could be part of that effort, whatever that looks like. And then I'll add that wood recycling facility reminded me that we don't have anything to share about this, but we are working with City of St. Paul and District Energy to see if we can connect the Metro plant to the District Energy system to use, we call it waste heat, because we generate heat on that site. Some of it is beneficially used to generate energy or electricity, but there's a lot of heat left, and there's an idea that we could heat downtown St. Paul with the Metro plant for carbon-free heat. We're working on that. There's a lot of design and feasibility, and again, like we're here, how would you pay for that? But that might impact the disposition of that parcel there and add another element of benefit to both of the causes that we're trying to further in terms of that partnership and the dump site.
I guess I just really appreciate how well everybody's listening to the fact that there's a regional impact to this outside of this area. And I completely understand, the locals and what your interest in this is, but this is a very expensive, very complicated, but long-term solution, and it's going to impact others if things are leaving this site. So thank you. I appreciate that. Groups like this sometimes are, people come with their idea and they're not listening to anybody else. So I don't get that at all from this group. So thank you for that. And the feedback, thank you. This is well done and very useful, this stakeholder.
I think we've got a list here of things to follow up on. One thing I've kind of heard, maybe it's more of a question to the group, is we did talk about the idea of enhanced cover or just, cover in place. Would it be helpful to have a little bit more on that numbers for this group to talk about? There are some positives and some drawbacks, that it doesn't solve all the issues, but just, is that something where more information would be helpful for the further conversations? Rather do that now than later, because report writing will be here soon.
That would be helpful.
I would just say, like, if you have other ideas, I'm sure PCA does, like increments that could do better to some degree, right? I think identifying any of that, if it's reasonable and available and has a benefit, right, might be useful as we try to figure out an ultimate recommendation or a tiered recommendation based on funding ability.
Well, for myself, I have a different focus in my life. My professional life has not been at the engineering level that a lot of you that are here have. So I'm more at the commenting on looking at it from the problems of funding, then become important as a council member. So I look at the order ranking to go with the cost possibilities, and then the environmental impacts have to also be considered, because that's been a concern of mine forever, ever since I was a kid, being outdoors, hiking in the wilderness and so forth. So if we could put in a balance sheet and come up with, as was suggested, 2 options, I think that not moving them, keeping them there, keeping the material there is a lot of reason to consider that one, because fully agree with not putting it in somebody else's backyard. It's a problem that's been generated here. Let's see what we can do as far as solving the problem here, and hope that new technologies can come along. Also, I saw a program last night that was talking something as simple as degradation of certain toxins by microbial use. They're finding microbes all around the world that have abilities to break things down, and it's a newly emerging field. I don't have great hopes that it can do this, but who knows what's going to be developing in the next 10 years or 20 years that we're looking at for these projects. So not doing nothing is not something I'm suggesting. Doing something that can begin to address the problem, and I would say on site for right now, is the consideration that I would be willing to back.
I'm still interested in just what those rail and barge options are and how those can lower the cost for a dig and haul option. I agree with others that have not been in favor of dig and haul and backfill and targeted treatments. In the dig and line landfill, I'd also like to learn more about how we could make some lemonade out of a big giant green lemon there, and what, green energy technologies through heat exchange or solar panel use, or what might be some value add or economic adds if that space is still going to have to get used for this purpose in a new way. And then, just as the wood area has been mentioned there, in a scenario where a dig and line happens, and if that wood yard remains and commercial activity remains in large quantity, just are there opportunities here around sustainable aviation fuel, wood recovery, production of wood-based biochar, where that convenient collection site is happening for some of these targeted remediation purposes, knowing that up in Duluth, the NRRI is working pretty actively to get some wood product manufacturers to the area. Just curious of what could be there in a future where this still has to remain as it is, but with a modern landfill underneath it.
Not too much to add, because you all have done such a good job of covering it. But again, right, reiterating the thank you to Zen Associates and folks really for the community engagement. Having that public input and community engagement is a really important part of the process. And so I'm really glad that it was done and it was done well, and that we've got that input and the MPCA for, supporting that, working to make sure that happened as well. Something I've said before, and I'll say again, you've heard, right? There is no pot of money in St. Paul to do this work. It's physically located in the city. There's no funding for that. Just like I'm assuming Ramsey County doesn't have a special stash, or South St. Paul or Cottage Grove or anybody, right? And so for me, it is a chicken and an egg. When we do talk about this and looking at what, the potential future uses and backing in versus the technical of what's needed dictates that future use and so on. So that is something that I know is in the back of my mind that I will be thinking about as we continue.
As Melanie said, being at the back of the line, it's a lot of seconding what a lot of you have already said. I second I like having two-ish options. I don't like having four. My suggestion earlier, I didn't intend to think that we put all of these and rank them 1 through 4, because I want the recommendations to feel like they've got some weight and that we've considered them and that we're trying to put forward good options, good as we best see it. It sounds like from discussions, the group's leaning on the dig in line or the new Big-Zy Lake. I would hope then that we can get into a little more detailed discussions in the next meetings then on, all right, if those are the ones that have risen, maybe how does that, especially the funding pots. I am also slightly concerned at the size of that hill that would be formed. I don't know if there's some type of hybrid option between hauling some of it that would lessen the size of that. Maybe that's for the next meeting if we're getting into more details or not. I'm still trying to be creative. But also really appreciative of the survey. I think that is very helpful. Understanding that lake option is at least not something that the community would completely despise if that was there. And also just appreciative of what Dave said, the openness of the group to kind of be talking through this. I hope it continues as we try to wrap this up in the next year, I guess, or so for the recommendation. But yeah.
Thanks. So yeah, last, nothing here that hasn't really been talked about. Again, thanks for the survey. That information is great to know what the community's thinking. I think it's really helped us today sort of like focus in, which has been awesome. Again, echo, we need to talk about funding. We've already done that, and I think agreeance on this idea of just backfilling that whole thing is probably not a reasonable approach. So thanks to everybody on the team again for the great conversation, and that's really all I got to add for today. Thanks.
All right, thank you. We got a closing slide. Wrapping up. Yeah. I want to say thanks for being here today. This was a great discussion. We're making progress. Next meeting is June 24th.